It gives me great honor now to turn to our first keynote speaker, Michal Krumer-Nevo from Ben-Gurion University, the Negev. Her address is Writing Against Othering. She is the director of the Israeli Center for Qualitative Research and associate professor in the School of Social Work at Ben-Gurion University. During the 1990s, she worked as a clinical social worker focusing on women living with poverty. Her recent work has shifted to the politics of poverty and its intersection with gender. She was an early supporter of the Congress and has been to every Congress. She has been a research fellow at the University of Chicago. She is the author of several books, Women in Poverty, Life Stories, Gender, Pain, and Resistance, co-editor of Qualitative Data Analysis, and co-editor of the forthcoming, I love this title, The Limits of Quantification. Please welcome our first keynote speaker.
It is a great honor for me to give this lecture this year, and I want to thank Norman for giving me this opportunity. I would like to use this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts regarding the possibilities that qualitative inquiry opens for research with a social change agenda. As both a social work practitioner and academic, I find research that is motivated by the energy of social activism and the effort to change the world most appealing. In this talk, I would like to invite you to think about the ways research may advance this social agenda through what I call researching and writing against othering. Othering is a process of demarcation in which differential standards of moral codes are applied to different social categories. In psychoanalytic theory, the category of the other is as primordial as consciousness itself. The process of othering, however, is a social process of differentiating between social groups. It entails not only differentiating between me and other people who belong to the same social group, but the harsh and harmful distinction between the we, who are perceived as subjects who have emotions, rationality, capabilities, experiences, knowledge, and will, and the others, who are perceived as objects lacking in complexity, motivation, rationality, and capabilities, and who serve as the carrier of what is undesirable in ourselves or repressed and buried in our unconsciousness. Through othering, the other is deprived from their visibility, uniqueness, subjectivity, voice, and knowledge. Ultimately, othering is the translation of difference to inferiority. The oppressive power of othering derives from the social distancing it creates and impassable barrier it draws between us and them. No subject volunteers to become an object. People are positioned and fixed at others through power structures which enable certain rules of behavior, discourse, and performance to become signifiers of the right hegemonic self, whereby divergence from this code is conceptualized as a deficit or inferiority. Othering thus becomes a rationale and justification for inequality. Schwab and his colleagues explain that identity codes which define the adaptive or dissident behavior of subordinates as signs of inferiority are powerful means of turning acts of resistance into evidence that the subordination is deserved and the inequality legitimate. The danger of othering lies in the fact that we are rarely, if ever, aware that it is being done. The very difficult of discerning it makes the analysis of othering essential to any critical assessment of social and cultural power mechanisms and dynamics. My proposal to consider research against othering is based on two convictions. First, that researchers play a role in the textual constitution of vulnerable persons as others, and second, that qualitative inquiry may make a specific contribution to the advocacy of social change through its power to challenge social constructions. Researchers, in my view, can and should make a conscious effort to combat othering. But I will start with a caveat. Writing and researching against othering is no simple matter, even when the researcher is conscious of the trap and intends not to fall into it. Let me tell you about a recent experience of my own. It involves a study I am carrying out on and with a community of immigrants who came from the Caucasus to Israel. The community originates in the Caucasus Mountains, in a region in the southern former Soviet Union, which embraces a diversity of ethnic groups and nations. The immigrants are termed in Hebrew Kavkazi, from the Hebrew term for Caucasus, and I will use this term Kavkazi here. While returning to their religious Jewish beliefs and Zionist aspirations, the Kavkazi Jews were also influenced by the region's dominant Muslim culture, traditions, and way of life. The community's integration into Israeli society has been hampered by the fact that stereotypes such as primitive and violent, which were ascribed to Muslim culture in the Caucasus, were ascribed to these immigrants in Israel as well. The roots of this perception lie in the Orientalist discourse adopted in the Soviet Union, which distinguished between Ashkenazi Jews originating in the European republics of the Soviet Union and Jews who lived in the Asian republics, among them the Kavkazi. This distinction, along with the discrimination that accompanied it, was imported to Israel and dovetailed into the local social dichotomies which enhanced the stigmatization of the community. The members of the Kavkazi community are unique in their keen awareness of the dangers of othering. Though they don't use the word othering, they openly talk about and object to their stigmatization. When I first came to the community center looking for allies for my research, I met Hanoch, the community's chair, who echoed the response of the colonized indigenous people described by Linda Smith, saying that he does not want any research and doesn't see any good coming of it. For him, research is a tool of cultural colonialism, and he refused to let me in. If you're interested in the Kavkazi community, you can come to the Kavkazi dance class, he said. I came and stayed for a year, once a week. The class turned out to be very loaded with respect to othering, and I'll focus on two critical moments as I term them. These are moments when the researcher must struggle to find a way of avoiding othering, moments of struggle to find an interpretation that will be rich, aesthetic, and serve a social change agenda without violating or being disrespectful toward the people involved. One critical moment involved the youth attitudes to the dance class. These boys and girls, aged 5 to 18, who attended the class, emphasized and defended their ethnic identity and saw in the dance class a powerful celebration of pride in their heritage and community. Some people, professionals from the educational and social services, were alarmed by this ethnic pride because they perceived this as a demonstration of ethnocentrism and unwillingness to integrate into Israeli society. It was rather easy for me to see that this interpretation was based on and enhancing othering. However, through my talking and listening to the young people, I could provide an alternative interpretation. In this interpretation, the dance class was seen as a means of resisting the stigmatization to which the community was subjected in Israel, and their emphasis on their ethnicity was a way of protecting their self-respect. This latter interpretation works against othering because it shows the dance class as the young people struggle against the inferior place they are put in by Israeli society and as a way of gaining cultural recognition and cultural capital in Israel. This critical moment was fairly easy to resolve. A caution is in order here, though. Taking the side of vulnerable populations is easier when you focus on the pain and scars caused by injustice, inequality, and stigma, and on the struggle of the people against their circumstances. However, this may mask other aspects of reality that are harder for the researcher to explain, to justify, or to identify with. This is what happened to me at the second critical moment, which was more difficult. Part of the boys' struggle to augment their self-respect and the respect of their community via the dance involved the superior status that the dance gives them in comparison to the girls. The boys explained to me that the dance describes our ethnic group. It's the way you dance it. The girls are gentle, so they dance gently, and the boy dance with power, vigorously. The dance shows beautifully the difference in our ethnic groups. This is what the boys say. That the woman is inferior to the man. He gets more respect, and the woman gets less. When I read this and similar passages in my field notes, I see the eyes of Hanoch, the community's chair, warning me not to join in stigmatizing the community. But can I look at patriarchy and not blame the community for being patriarchal? How can I talk about patriarchy and still interpret against othering? Other researchers struggle with similar issues. Michelle Fine once told me that in her study of women prisoners at a maximum security prison in New York, she had difficulty remembering, in her words, and taking into account the horrible crimes the women had committed. She was discussing the similarities between them and herself as women who are victims of all sorts of violence, when they insisted, yes, but there are also some differences between us, since some of us killed people. Michelle Fine read this as the women's insistence against avoiding othering through romanticization or through forgetting or ignoring the difficult aspects of the reality and behavior of human actors, make individuals, cultures, societies, and historical epochs comprehensible as wholes, humanizes time. Dialogue begins with the conversation or interview. In these encounters, as Roberta Sent and I wrote in an article we co-authored, sometimes interviewees say things that surprise or shock us because they diverge from the hegemonic value system. Our instinctive response to such statements is often othering. As an example, I'll tell you about Sarah, a woman living in poverty whom I interviewed. Sarah, a single mother of 3 children, was on the verge of being evicted from her apartment for the non-payment of rent. Despite this threat, she told me that she had used the rent money she received from the welfare agency to buy the children a television and video. It is all too easy for researchers who have never experienced poverty on their own to interpret such behavior as evidence of Sarah's poor judgment and irresponsibility, that is, to other her. And psychology and social work discourse is in fact full of this kind of interpretations. To avoid such othering, I suggest that the researcher dialogue on the matter with the interviewee, asking her to explain her conduct. This kind of dialogue over hard questions is possible only when the interviewee can take these questions as an invitation for self-reflection, and only when she can believe that the interviewer wishes to understand her, not to judge her. When I asked Sarah how she understands her decision to buy a TV and video rather than to pay for a rent, Sarah, who had experienced an extremely abusive and deprived childhood, offered a cogent explanation. I quote, "I don't ever in my life want my kids to feel what I felt, ever. I'll do everything for my children, everything. Look here, I could pay my rent, 4 months in advance and have nothing to worry about. But no," I said, "I'll buy them a TV, I'll buy a video, so that they can enjoy themselves and don't have to feel that they don't have these things." Sarah went on to analyze the social welfare policies, suggesting that the welfare services would never pay for a TV or video, but would still pay her rent even after she bought these things. This is only a very brief example, but I hope it can exemplify how through this kind of dialogue, Sarah was able to historicize her behavior, placing it against the background of a personal biography, and contextualize it, placing her behavior in the context of her relationship with the welfare services. By showing the logic of her behavior, her explanation checked any tendency towards othering that I, as the researcher, may have had at this critical moment.